Hello everyone, my name's Zenitsu and I'm back with another Digimon deck profile video. So today I'm going to be taking a look at BT13, and BT13 offers us lots of new and powerful tools to be able to build and iterate on some new and existing decks. And today's deck I'm going to be taking a look at is going to be the brand new, ever infamous Royal Knights deck. So the Royal Knights deck is a very interesting deck because you actually are going to be playing the game completely differently than the majority of what normally goes on in Digimon, where you're going to be utilizing King Drasil as the main card to stash cards underneath him to make playing your other Royal Knights cheap and efficient, so that way we could try to gain full advantage on all of our different Royal Knights, having a nice toolbox approach in terms of the different types of tools that we can use, on top of the fact that Omnimon is going to be the big win con, pulling out all of the Royal Knights that are stashed underneath King Drasil to make a really powerful push turn. So Bandai did lay out their little write-up on the deck, so if you want, feel free to read this to be able to get some insight in Bandai's opinion on what they think a good Royal Knights deck is, and they even give a recommended deck composition to help you get started in terms of being able to build and iterate on the deck with a nice little write-up on its core strategy. But that's just their interpretation of the deck, and this is my interpretation of the deck. So, starting off with the Digitama, I am, like they are, going to be running 4 copies of King Drasil. So, King Drasil is the only Digitama we need because this is, well, the main card of the deck on how it's going to be functioning as a whole and what the deck is centered around. He is quite a unique Digitama because we're actually not going to be moving him out of the raising area, and instead he has a lot of abilities that are going to be acting inside of the raising or breeding area. So, the first ability states that your Digimon can't Digivolve, which isn't a problem because, well, we're going to be hard playing our Digimon almost all of the time. Then, while he's also in the breeding area, he's going to reduce the play cost of playing a Royal Knights traded Digimon by 4, and for every other source that's underneath him, we get to increase the cost reduction by 1, so the more sources he has, the cheaper our cards will become at being able to play for some more explosive mid to late game potential. Then, on top of that, while he's still in the breeding area, at the start of our main phase, we get to reveal 1 card from our egg deck, then place that card in all of our Digimon with Royal Knights in our traits on our field to the bottom of this Digimon's Digivolution source, so he has a way to be able to feed his inheritables, so that goes into his secondary ability to try to make our cards as cheap as they possibly can. Then his inheritable ability for himself is going to allow us to gain a memory when we have a Royal Knights traded option card enter in our battle area, which is anything with the delay ability, so that way we can try to make even utilizing our options as cheap and efficient as we possibly can. And then when it comes to the level 3s and the level 4s, the vast majority of them are going to be our draw engine for the deck, so that way we could try to dig through our cards as best as we possibly can. So the combination on Sistermons and Omekamons that you're going to be using is entirely up to you, and they're all kind of flexes. They're just, again, in the deck to try to help you try to be as consistent as you possibly can. So I'm going to be running 2 copies of Sistermon Blanc just because she's 3 cost versus CL being a 4 cost and Omekamon being a 4 cost. So what she's doing is allowing us to discard a card and draw 2, which is pretty good at churning through our deck, while also interacting with our Royal Knights by having this Digimon gain the decoy red and black ability as long as we have a Royal Knight on our field, so we could have some protection for our Royal Knights for this card just sitting around on the field after we hard play it. Then I'm going to be running 4 copies of Omekamon. This just has the on-play effect of drawing a card, but it also has the upside of having an on-delete effect that's actually interacting with our King Drasil, where it's allowing us to place a card with Royal Knights and its traits from our hand underneath our King Drasil in the breeding area, so it allows us to try to fill up his inheritables as best and fast as we possibly can to make more explosive turns possible a little bit quicker. And then the last of the draw engine space that I'm going to be utilizing with the level 4s is going to be 2 copies of Sistermon CL. So Sistermon CL and Sistermon Blanc from the starter deck are both really, really good cards. This one, instead of just drawing us a card, is actually acting as a digging tool to look through the top 3 and pick a Royal Knights traded card from among them and put it into our hand, and then we trash the rest. Then she also has another really good upside for our Royal Knights while she's just sitting on the field, to be able to give all of our Royal Knights the reboot ability, so that way they have some good offensive and defensive capabilities. And then when it comes to the only other level 4 of the deck that actually is a Royal Knight, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Magnamon. So Magnamon is a really good early game turn for our King Drasil, just because he is the cheapest Royal Knight for us to use, and on top of that, he also comes with the blocker ability to stave off some of the opponent's early game aggression, with the all turns ability where when it would leave the field, so that way when our King Drasil is putting him underneath himself, that allows us to trigger the ability to draw a card. Even though we're not playing a Vmon, it doesn't necessarily matter. He's just a good, cheap early game play to help feed our Drasil and draw us some cards and cycle through our deck. Then I'm not going to be running any level 5s because, well, there is no real level 5 that works good with the deck, so I'm just going to be skipping right to our level 6s. So I'm going to be running 2 copies of the brand new BT13 Jesmon, because a lot of our Royal Knights from BT13 have both an on-play and when digivolving ability, so we could take advantage of them not only inside of their base deck, but hard playing them with the cost reduction ability that King Drasil is giving us to make playing these cards as efficient as we possibly can. So the on-play ability that we're trying to gain off of this card is some just basic level removal on deleting the opponent's Digimon whose DP adds up to 6,000 or less, and the more other Digimon that we have in play, the stronger this ability becomes. Then on top of that, he also has a nice all turns ability for our Sistermons and our other Royal Knights by giving all of our Digimon plus 1,000 DP, which may or may not matter. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Gallantmon. So Gallantmon not only has a really good on-play when digivolving and when attacking ability, but the fact that he comes with his own cost reduction ability himself that we could pair up with King Drasil just makes him a really easy card for the deck to use, especially since he comes with the rush ability, so we could attack right away the turn we want to play him. And then his on-play when digivolving and when attacking ability is not limited to once per turn, so we'll at least be able to trigger this ability twice, ideally once when we play or digivolve up into him, and again when we attack. And the ability we're trying to gain is More Removal, where we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 6,000 DP or less. Then if no Digimon was deleted this way, we get to delete one of the opponent's Digimon with 13,000 DP or more instead, so it's just allowing us to be able to deal with small or large bodies, depending on what we're going to be facing off against. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Gankoomon. So Gankoomon is a really important card for this deck, again, just because he has the blocker ability to try to stave off some of the opponent's aggression. A lot of our cards in the deck don't have rush, so the second we hard play them, we won't be able to swing with a lot of our cards, so the more defensive cards that we have when we're hard playing them, the better. And then he has an on-play and when digivolving ability of his own, where we get to play a Digimon with Sistermon in its name from our trash, or one Digimon with Royal Knights in its traits from the Digivolution source of one of our Digimon in our breeding area. Unfortunately, we can't play Gankoomon or Omnimon with this ability, but the fact that we have the utility on it, we could reuse our Sistermons, or use another Digimon that's stashed underneath our Yggdrasil, just make this card super appealing. Next, I'm going to be running 2 copies of UlforceVeedramon. So UlforceVeedramon is another decent card to try to help stave off some of the opponent's potential aggression. So his on-play ability is some more control, where for each Digimon with Royal Knights in its traits and each of our blue tamers, we get to trash the top 2 Digivolution sources of one of the opponent's Digimon to try to put them in a state where their Digimon isn't going to be as impactful as it once was. Then its other ability states that during your turn, once per turn, when you play a Digimon with Royal Knights in its traits or a blue tamer, we get to bounce one of the opponent's Digimon with no Digivolution sources to their hand, so he's going to help try to remove the opponent's sources, and then when we play another card after him, he's going to ideally try to get rid of that card we just stripped, or try to deal with some other problematic cards. And speaking of more control, more aggression, and more removal, next I'm going to be running 2 copies of Kentaurosmon. So Kentaurosmon's on play and when digivolving ability states that if the total cards in both players' security is 6 or less, then we get to gain 3 memory, which is really good when we're already trying to reduce the cost of this card, so he's going to be making himself and some of our other subsequent plays even cheaper and more efficient. Then we get to reveal 1 card from our hand, and if the card we revealed is yellow, we get to put it on top of our security stack face down, and if it isn't, then we just get to return it into our hand. So he potentially has a little bit of recovery built into the deck as well. Then he even has a nice when attacking ability, which we're not going to be triggering a whole lot, but it still can come up off of our big Omnimon push turn, just because the Omnimon will give him Rush to be able to utilize this ability, where we get to trash the top card of our security stack, unsuspend this Digimon, so that way it can make a follow-up attack, and one of the opponent's Digimon gets minus 7,000 DP for the turn, making it another really decent removal and aggro tool all in one. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Leopardmon. So Leopardmon is another really decent combo card, even though it doesn't have an on-play ability. The fact that its main ability, which we could trigger once per turn, still allows us to be able to reduce the cost of playing a Royal Knights traded Digimon from our hand by 4. Again, just tries making our cards as cheap and effective as we possibly can. Then he also has another benefit where during all turns, when we play another Digimon, all of our Digimon with Royal Knights in its trait and all of our green Digimon gain the blocker ability, so that way we could still utilize this card to reduce the cost of our other cards while having some good defensive capabilities. Next, I'm going to be running 3 copies of Alphamon. So Alphamon is a really fantastic card for, again, having some good built-in defense at trying to stall out the opponent, and that's kind of like the core theme on the deck, is just stalling out the opponent long enough for our King Drasil to be as full of cards as we possibly can, while we're trying to dig for our Omnimon, so that way we could just win the game the turn we play our Omnimon. So Alphamon's on-play and when digivolving ability helps accomplish this goal by placing a Digimon card with X antibody in its traits or Royal Knights in its traits from our trash under this Digimon to the bottom of its Digivolution source, and all of the opponent's Digimon with the play cost of 10 or higher can't attack until the end of the opponent's next turn, so it's really starting to try to limit what the opponent's Digimon can do, especially their higher level Digimon, since we have a decent amount of blockers and defensive tool for a lot of their lower level Digimon. Then he has a nice ability where during all turns, once per turn, when this Digimon would leave the battle area, we get to return 1 Digimon card with X antibody in its traits or Royal Knight in its traits from this card's Digivolution source, which we just stacked thanks to his on-play and when digivolving ability, to the bottom of our deck to prevent this card from leaving play. So if we don't want our Alphamon to be absorbed by our King Drasil, we don't have to, or we could utilize this as a good defensive tool to try to make sure that we could have a Digimon around. So he's just another really decent card with a lot of good defensive applications. And speaking of cards with good defensive applications, next I'm going to be running 2 copies of Craniamon. So Craniamon is another Royal Knights that has the blocker ability. Then his on-play and when digivolving ability is pretty good at adding some extra protection, just because this Digimon isn't going to be affected by the opponent's Digimon until the end of the opponent's turn. He's still going to be vulnerable to their options, but regardless, it's just really annoying for the opponent to fight through, nonetheless, having some built-in protections. Then he also has a nice ability where at the end of the opponent's turn, we get to choose one of the opponent's Digimon and force them to attack, so that way we could try to get rid of their Digimon alternatively by goading them into an attack they might not have wanted to do. Next, I'm going to be running 4 copies of Dynasmon. So Dynasmon is going to be another searching or digging tool for the deck to try to help find the Royal Knights we're specifically looking for. So his on-play in when Digivolving ability lets us do something very similar to what we just saw with our Sistermon CL from the starter deck, except instead of revealing 3 cards, we're revealing 4 cards, and instead of only being able to take 1, we could add 2 cards with either Lucemon, so if you wanted to splash in Lucemon you could, or Royal Knights, which is the main cards you're going to be looking for anyway. Then he also has another really good secondary ability where during your turn, when you play a Digimon with Lucemon in its name or Royal Knights in its traits, we get to delete all of the opponent's Digimon that's level 4 or lower, again adding even more control into the deck. Next, I'm going to be running 1 copy of LordKnightmon. So LordKnightmon is going to be a pretty decent card at being able to retrieve our Royal Knights and our Lucemons out of our trash when we hard play or Digivolve into this card. Then it also has a nice upside that's basically acting like an ice wall, where during the opponent's turn, when an opponent's Digimon attacks, we get to gain a memory for each of our Digimon with Royal Knights in its traits on our field. So the more Royal Knights that we have on our field, the more memory we're going to be gaining on the opponent's turn, and that could potentially take away their ability to play their turn effectively, so that way it puts us in a pretty good and advantageous position. Next, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Examon. So Examon, even though we could actually line up the DNA Digivolution just to be able to get some extra aggressive plays in, we still can hard play the card and utilize the card like all of our other Royal Knights. He has a nice on-play and when Digivolving ability where we get to suspend one of the opponent's Digimon down, and then that Digimon doesn't unsuspend during the opponent's next unsuspend phase, so it's good at just trying to stunlock the opponent's Digimon down, but the upside is going into its secondary ability for when an opponent's Digimon becomes suspended. Because we suspended it with its own first ability, we get to activate one of the other abilities, so it has a nice modular effect on being able to pick and choose which ability we want when we need it, on either suspending another one of the opponent's Digimon down or unsuspending one of our Digimon, so that way we can line up some even more powerful push turns and more aggressive lines of play. And then the last Digimon and last level 7 and Royal Knight of the deck is going to be 4 copies of Omnimon. So Omnimon is going to be the secondary most important card in the entire deck outside of our Yggdrasil, just because of what this card is doing for the deck, because of its on-play / when Digivolving ability on being able to delete one of the opponent's Digimon, or we get to play each Digimon with Royal Knights in its traits with different names from the Digivolution source of one of our Digimon in the breeding area without paying their play cost. Then those Digimon that are played with this effect, we get to trash the Digimon in the breeding area, and all of the Digimon gain the Rush ability. So we basically just pull out all of the Royal Knights that were absorbed into our Yggdrasil in our raising area, delete our Yggdrasil, so that way we would be able to Digivolve after that, but the most important part is the fact that all of the Digimon that we played gain the Rush ability, so the more Digimon that we play, the more potential aggression that we'll have to be able to close out the games the second we go into our Omnimon. And then when it comes to the tamer of the deck realistically doesn't need a tamer, but I'm going to be running 3 copies of Marcus, just because it's a really good card to use with Kentaurosmon to shove into our security, because it has a really good on-play ability to be able to suspend this tamer, and then even though we're not playing Agumons or Greymons in the deck, the fact that when this becomes suspended, one of the opponent's Digimon gets minus 3000 DP for the turn, it means that we have some pretty decent low-level control on top of a tamer that's also going to be acting as the deck's dedicated memory fixer, so we'll always have at least 3 memory to be able to work with to try to make our plays as effective as we can possibly make them. Next, on to the options, I'm going to be running 1 copy of Crimson Blaze. So Crimson Blaze is a tech or flex spot for the deck. It doesn't really have to be this card if you don't want it to be, but I do like using this card just because we do have a decent amount of red to actually be able to utilize it at being able to not only shut out the opponent from being able to play their Digimon by their card effects, but also delete all of their mid to low level Digimon as well, as being a nice security threat. But when it comes to the main option of the deck, we're going to be running 4 copies of Royal Knights of the Purge. So Royal Knights of the Purge is a white option, which doesn't really matter just because our egg is going to be white, so we'll always be able to utilize this card. On top of the fact that it has a nice main ability to, by default, draw us a card, so at worst it's replacing itself, and it's even help filling up our King Drasil by putting a Digimon from our hand underneath our King Drasil to the bottom of his Digivolution source, and then this card will go into the battle area, which if our King Drasil has other King Drasils in his inheritables, will start netting us some memory, so it's not actually costing us 6 to be able to utilize this card. But the secondary main ability of Delay is the big pull to utilizing this card, just because we get to play a Royal Knight from one of the Digivolution sources from the Digimon in our raising area and play it for free. We won't be able to gain any of the on-play effects, but that's okay, because we could still gain a lot of other benefits off of the card, depending on what we're going to be taking, and that Digimon also is going to gain Rush for the turn, allowing us to have some really good utility on the Digimon we're able to pull out from our Yggdrasil without the need of our Omnimon. And then when it comes to the overall game plan and gameplay of the deck, this deck is a really interesting deck to play just because you're playing the game of Digimon completely different than most other decks in the game. So when it comes to actually playing your low-level Digimon, again, you're just trying to utilize all of the low-level Digimon to draw cards, but the fact that we want to try to fill up a Yggdrasil as quickly as we possibly can, or King Drasil, makes it so that we're heavily incentivized for utilizing Magnamon as our big start. So the whole ebb and flow of what the deck is trying to do is essentially just Royal Knight, Yggdrasil, throw the Royal Knight underneath at the beginning of our turn, put another Yggdrasil underneath our Yggdrasil, so that way we could try to stack our Yggdrasil, so that way we could reduce our cards even faster, and then kind of keep that gameplay and cycle going. And then once we have enough cards underneath our Yggdrasil to be able to play our high-level Digimon even more effectively, then we're just going to start dropping whatever body we need to try to stop the opponent, while we're trying to dig out our Omnimon or other cards to be able to play our Royal Knights from our Yggdrasil's inheritable sources and gain a ton of benefit from so. So when it comes to just some basic level combos in terms of how you want to utilize your cards, Leopardmon is going to be a really important card to use, especially as the main card to pull out with Purge, just because we don't have any on-play abilities that we're not taking advantage of, so we just get all upsides from our Leopardmon. So shoving underneath our Leopardmon is going to be super important, so that way when we set up a Purge, we could purge out our Leopardmon, have a bunch of inheritable sources underneath our Yggdrasil, and then combine that play cost reduction with Leopardmon's play cost reduction to try to play Omnimon for as cheap as we possibly can, delete our Yggdrasil and play all of the Digimon underneath our Yggdrasil, and be able to line up our attacks so that way we could try to make a really big and powerful push turn. And because our Yggdrasil is deleted, that allows us, if we still have our Leopardmon on the field and we are able to get our Ulforce out, to be able to swing. Hopefully these cards will live and line up a DNA to be able to put even more pressure onto the opponent. So it is just all about trying to fill up your Yggdrasil's inheritables as quickly as you possibly can, play the cards you need to disrupt the opponent while you're buying time for your Omnimon, and then just make a big Omnimon push turn, which is why Omnimon is just one of the best, if not the best card in the entire deck, and all of the other Royal Knights are in here just to try to stall the opponent out, while having enough space extra to have some decent filler cards to try to make sure that we could be as effective and efficient with our cards as we possibly can. Like Marcus with Kentaurosmon as just another example of a mini little combo that we could do to try to make sure our deck is going to be as functional as it possibly can be. And then we still have a whole bunch of various tech and tools to be able to customize the deck based on your Royal Knights lineup and abilities that you're trying to be playing around with. And the fact that we do have all of these different Royal Knights means that we could tech for various different metas as well if we need to try to push the offense, push the defense, or just change up some of the cards that we're playing around with. So one of the big appeals to utilizing some of the old Royal Knights is because, well, they're still Royal Knights and we could utilize their abilities alternatively. So Magnamon, we could take advantage of his When Digivolving ability if we're running Jesmon GX, but the fact that he's just another low-level blocker for the deck to use while being a Royal Knight makes him still very appealing. Then we also have Alphamon as another good security threat that again is trying to stall out the opponent, while also trying to take advantage of the fact that if we give this card Rush and he survives the attack, we could start gaining memory to make more powerful follow-up plays with. Then, speaking of good cards to use with the fact that they can be paired up with Rush, we have Gallantmon because he's going to have Raid, and we can use his when attacking ability to control the opponent's field or start burning their security if they don't have anything that we could delete. Then we could think about utilizing the old Examon as well, again, just because him being paired up with Rush means that we could swing, get a free unsuspend, meaning that we could attack multiple times with this card, and the fact that if we do end up using Omnimon to delete King Drasil, that allows us to be able to utilize our DNA Digivolution, depending on the cards that we're pulling out, for, again, even more offensive plays. Then, as I mentioned before, we could think about teching in Jesmon GX, just because we do run a lot of different level 6 Royal Knights, and this is just one of the best level 7s to digivolve them into. Then we do have some Omnimon X antibodies, just because, well, they're still Royal Knights, and we're going to be utilizing our Omnimon, so we could digivolve them into their X forms for more control and offensive style of abilities, depending on the Omnimon X antibody you're going to want to use. Then we do have some more Royal Knights options. We do have another delay-based Royal Knight option, which means with Yggdrasil, we could potentially make this card free to use, or even cheaper than it already is, as just another good searching tool, even though most of the time we're not going to actually be able to use the delay to be able to reduce Digivolutions, because we're not Digivolving very often. And then the other Royal Knight option that we have is Saken Meppa. This is a really good card to go with Jesmon GX for, obviously, the Jesmon GX-based synergy, but the fact that we could use this card just as an extra unsuspend means that we could use it as a way to get more attacks in. Then we do have some other Sistermons that we could think about incorporating into the deck, but I think the only other good Sistermon is going to be BT6 Sistermon Blanc, just because at worst, she's still drawing us a card, and with our other Royal Knights, our other Sistermons will be able to become blockers, so it's just more good cycling and Royal Knight-based synergy. Then we do have some other options that we could think about running, depending on the types of tools you want to incorporate. Then some other good white options that we could run, because our Digitama is white, so we'll always have access at it, is going to be X Program, again, for some more hard control. And with X Program, we could even think about running Death X, even though it's not a Royal Knight. The fact that it just reduces its own play cost for the opponent having cards still makes it a very appealing and very strong card for us to use. And then another really good generic card for us to use just to try to increase the levels of playability on controlling the opponent's low-level Digimon that we have is going to be the brand new Porcupamon. Then we do have some other tamers that we could think about running in the deck if you really wanted to run a tamer, all depending on the types of synergies and options you're trying to play and line up. So if you wanted to take more of a blue approach, you could think about running the BT1 Mat, because we're going to be hard playing blue Digimon, as another way to try to strip the opponent's sources even more, so that way our Ulforce could be as effective as it possibly can be. Or you could just run something like a Kiroshiro just for some extra card draw. So that's all I really have for this video. As always, feel free to tell me your thoughts down in the comments below, and down in the description below are a couple of different ways you could support me and the channel. So I do have a TCG Player affiliate link, so when you use that link to buy cards off of TCG Player, then some of that money will go to supporting me and the channel. I also do make and sell playmats over on Overcard Gamers on Facebook, so when you buy a playmat with my design, then some of that money will also go to help supporting me and the channel. And on top of all of that, I do have a Twitch account over on twitch.tv/Zenitsu, so giving me a follow and a subscription also helps support me there, and I do play Digimon on top of various other games on that platform as well. So thank you everyone for watching, and as always, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content, and I'll see you in the next video.